A 55-year-old tech CEO storms into Judge Caprio's courtroom 40 minutes late. Tailored navy suit, polished Oxfords, and a diamond-tipped pen in his pocket, the kind of man who thinks rules bend for him. His phone is pressed to his ear, voice loud enough to echo off the marble walls. Tell finance to close the deal before noon. No delays. I don't care what legal says. The bailiff calls for order. Cameras are already rolling. Judge Caprio looks up from the bench, calm but unimpressed. Sir, this is a courtroom, not your conference room. Please end the call. The man holds up one finger, to a sitting judge. Then he finishes his call, turns with a smirk and finally mutters, Yeah, let's get this over with. The gallery murmurs. Nobody talks to Judge Caprio like that. Not the mayor, not celebrities, not anyone. Yet this man, Richard Hale, CEO of Hale Systems, radiates entitlement. He adjusts his cuff links as if this were another meeting he's about to dominate. Mr. Hale, the judge begins, you were ordered to appear at 10 o'clock sharp. Richard checks his Rolex. It's only 10:40. Relax, Judge. I'm here now. Silence falls so thick you can almost hear the collective gasp. In this courtroom, humility is the only currency, and he's bankrupt. He has no idea what's coming. Because the next 5 minutes will turn this courtroom into a masterclass in power, pride, and poetic justice. What happens when a man who thinks he's untouchable meets the one person who actually holds judgment? You're about to find out. Subscribe to Real Judge Stories and drop your thoughts in the comments. Does arrogance deserve mercy, or a lesson that money can't buy? Thursday morning. The courtroom clock strikes 10, sharp as a gavel's edge. The bailiff calls out, Case number 14728, Richard Hale versus the City of Providence. Charge, contempt of court. His voice rings through the air, but the defendant's chair sits empty. Rows of spectators shift in their seats, whispering. Judge Caprio reviews the file with quiet precision. No theatrics, just patient authority. Has Mr. Hale contacted the court? He asks. No, Your Honor, the bailiff replies. 10 minutes pass. Then 20. Still no sign of him. Cameras record every second. At 10:40, the heavy wooden doors swing open. Richard Hale strides in as if he owns the place. Not hurried, not sorry. His steps are deliberate, like every second belongs to him. He doesn't look at the bench, doesn't acknowledge the judge, doesn't even silence his phone. Yeah, we'll finalize the merger later, he says into the receiver. I'm stuck in some court thing. The bailiff's jaw tightens. Gasps scatter across the gallery. Judge Caprio waits, still and composed, until Richard finally ends his call. Mr. Hale, he says evenly, you were expected at 10 o'clock. It's now 10:40. Richard shrugs, careless. Traffic. It happens. You didn't think to call ahead? I'm here now, Richard replies, eyes on his watch. Can we just move this along? I've got a board meeting at 11. That single sentence, delivered with the casual arrogance of a man unaccustomed to consequences, hangs in the air like a challenge. And everyone in that room knows, Judge Caprio doesn't let challenges go unanswered. The stage is set, the tension razor sharp. Pride just entered the courtroom, and justice is about to rise to meet it. The doors close behind him with a heavy thud that sounds almost ceremonial, as if sealing off the outside world where Richard Hale's wealth and influence mean something. Inside this courtroom, those titles lose their shine. Judge Caprio watches silently as the CEO takes his place at the defendant's podium, adjusting his jacket like he's about to deliver a keynote speech rather than face a contempt charge. The room feels smaller now. The cameras zoom in. Reporters whisper, scribbling notes. Even the air seems to pause for whatever arrogance is about to spill out next. State your name for the record, the judge says. Richard Hale, he replies with confidence, CEO of Hale Systems. The words hang like a trophy. He says them as if the title alone should earn him deference, as if Judge Caprio might suddenly stand up and shake his hand. But the judge only nods. Mr. Hale, this proceeding concerns your failure to appear for a prior court date 3 weeks ago. Richard sighs, rolling his shoulders. Yeah, I heard. Look, I was traveling. Business emergency. I run a global operation, not exactly easy to rearrange for a parking ticket. A low murmur ripples through the crowd. Judge Caprio's brow tightens, but his voice remains calm. This isn't about a parking ticket, Mr. Hale. It's about a court order. You ignored it. Richard's lips twitch in a half smile, not of amusement but dismissal. With all respect, Your Honor, I think there are bigger problems in the world than a missed hearing. And that's the moment the tone shifts. The audience feels it. The air changes. For the first time, Richard Hale's power doesn't fill the room. Judge Caprio's silence does. The battle lines are drawn, ego versus authority. Judge Caprio leans slightly forward, his pen resting between two fingers. "Mr. Hale," he says evenly, "you were due in this courtroom at 10 o'clock. It's now 10:42. Why are you late?" Richard exhales through his nose, tilting his head as though the question itself is an inconvenience. "Like I said, traffic. You know how it is." The courtroom goes still. No one speaks, but the collective thought is the same. He didn't just say that. Judge Caprio's expression doesn't change. "Traffic," he repeats quietly, almost to himself. "And you didn't think to call the court to inform us?" Richard shrugs, his tone careless. "I'm here now, aren't I? Let's just get this over with." A ripple of disbelief spreads through the room. A few spectators glance at each other, wide-eyed. Even the bailiff's jaw tightens. "Mr. Hale," Judge Caprio says slowly, "this court operates on respect, for time, for process, for the rule of law. You've shown none of those." Richard smirks. "With respect, Judge, I manage over 700 employees. My time is valuable. I can't drop everything because of a scheduling error." "A scheduling error?" Caprio asks. "You mean the one where you ignored a lawful summons?" Richard raises a brow, deflecting. "Look, can we just pay whatever fine and move on? I'll write a check right now." He reaches into his jacket and pulls out a black leather checkbook, the same way another man might reach for his wallet at dinner. Caprio's voice drops an octave. "Put the checkbook away, Mr. Hale. This isn't about money." For the first time, Richard hesitates. The judge's tone sharpens. "This is about something you seem to have misplaced, respect. The real hearing has finally begun." Richard lets out a dry laugh, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. He leans forward on the podium, confident, unshaken. "With all due respect, Judge," he begins, "you have to understand my position. I built Helion Systems from a one-room startup into a $400 million company. I employ hundreds of people. I keep this city's tech sector alive. So forgive me if a parking citation wasn't my top priority." A few quiet gasps ripple through the courtroom. Someone in the back shakes their head. Judge Caprio doesn't react. His pen simply clicks once, a sound louder than Richard expects. "More important than the court's authority?" Caprio asks, his tone mild, too mild. "That's not what I said," Richard replies quickly, though his grin lingers. "I'm just saying, in my world things move fast. I make decisions worth millions of dollars every day. Missing a date isn't disrespect. It's just reality." Caprio nods slowly, eyes still fixed on the man in front of him. "Reality," he echoes. "And in your reality, Mr. Hale, the law is optional?" Richard shifts, straightening his tie. "Don't twist my words. I respect the system. But when you're responsible for hundreds of jobs, sometimes priorities." The judge interrupts softly, "Sometimes accountability becomes inconvenient." Silence. Even Richard's smirk falters. Caprio folds his hands. "You think the rules are suggestions. You think success buys leniency. Tell me, Mr. Hale, do your employees get to skip deadlines because they're busy being successful?" Richard blinks, speechless for half a second, then forces another smile. "I'm not here to debate philosophy, Judge. Can we proceed?" Caprio leans back, unflinching. "We are proceeding right through the heart of your arrogance." The tension in the room thickens. Pride has met patience, and patience is winning. The silence stretches. Judge Caprio studies Richard Hale like a surgeon inspecting an open wound, calm, precise, merciless. "Mr. Hale," he says finally, "you seem to think your achievements excuse your absence, your tone, and your disregard for this court." Richard straightens, crossing his arms. "Excuse? No. But context matters, doesn't it? I make decisions that affect hundreds of families, investors, entire markets. When I move, things change. When I speak, deals close. I can't operate under the same rules as everyone else." Caprio tilts his head slightly. "The same rules, meaning the law?" Richard meets his gaze, unfazed. "Meaning time, protocol, bureaucracy, all that slows real progress." He gestures dismissively. "Your Honor, you can't compare what I do to someone arguing over a parking ticket. It's not the same world." The judge's voice drops, steady as granite. "And what world is that, Mr. Hale?" Richard smirks, and makes the mistake that will echo far beyond this room. "Do you know who I am, Judge? In my company, in my industry, I'm God." The air is sucked out of the courtroom. A few people gasp. Someone audibly whispers, "Did he just say God?" Caprio's pen stops mid-note. His eyes lift slowly. "Excuse me?" Richard doubles down. I'm responsible for lives, jobs, futures. When I decide, it happens. I create outcomes. I build reality. The judge says nothing. He simply sets his pen down, folds his hands, and lets the silence punish the arrogance far better than words could. For the first time, Richard feels something foreign, unease. In this room, his titles mean nothing. His wealth means nothing. And suddenly, for a man who called himself God, silence feels an awful lot like judgment. For several long seconds, no one moves. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seems to fade beneath the weight of what's just been said. The courtroom feels suspended, like time itself is waiting for Judge Caprio's next word. The judge doesn't speak right away. He simply stares at Richard Hale, unblinking, as if measuring the full extent of the man's arrogance. The CEO shifts slightly, glancing around as if expecting someone to step in, to save him, to laugh and say it was all a misunderstanding. But no one does. Mr. Hale, Judge Caprio finally says, his voice calm but cold, did I hear you correctly? Richard clears his throat. It's a metaphor, Your Honor. I was just trying to express the level of responsibility I carry. A metaphor, Caprio repeats softly. He leans forward just enough for the microphone to catch every syllable. And in this metaphorical godhood of yours, does that mean Rhode Island law no longer applies to you? The CEO opens his mouth, then closes it. The bravado is slipping, replaced by a nervous stiffness in his jaw. Caprio lets the silence stretch again. He doesn't raise his voice, doesn't need to. Authority radiates from restraint, not volume. I've seen a lot of people in this courtroom, Mr. Hale, the judge says at last. Rich, poor, guilty, innocent. But arrogance this pure? He pauses. That's rare. No one dares breathe. Richard looks down at his Rolex, the same watch he used to measure other people's time, and for the first time today, it ticks louder than his confidence. The silence becomes a mirror, one that reflects everything money can't hide. And in that reflection, Richard Hale begins to realize, the reckoning has arrived. Judge Caprio finally leans forward, elbows resting lightly on the bench, the kind of posture that signals calm before a storm. His voice is steady, each word measured. Mr. Hale, you've described yourself as God in your industry, a man whose decisions shape lives and fortunes. Yet here you are, standing in contempt of the very system that protects those lives and fortunes. Do you understand the irony? Richard forces a small laugh, trying to recover control. Judge, you're taking this out of context. I was making a point about leadership. Caprio doesn't blink. You were making a point about power. But leadership and power aren't the same thing. Leadership requires humility. Power without humility becomes tyranny. The courtroom remains utterly still. Even the sound of scribbling reporters fades. The judge continues, voice firm but composed. You believe the law bends around success. You believe respect can be purchased. You believe your time is worth more than anyone else's. Tell me, Mr. Hale, do you think that belief makes you exceptional or simply blind? Richard's shoulders stiffen. I think I've earned the right to be treated differently. Caprio's pen taps once on the desk. You've earned wealth, not privilege. The words land like a hammer. Here, the judge says, there are no CEOs or janitors. Only citizens equal under the law. You may control your company, Mr. Hale, but not this courtroom. Richard's defiance falters. His mouth opens but no words follow. The cameras zoom in, catching the exact second arrogance turns into fear. Caprio's tone softens just slightly. You say you build reality, Mr. Hale? Allow me to remind you of another one. In this room, reality is defined by the law, not ego. And with that, the dismantling of Richard Hale truly begins. Judge Caprio reaches for the case file, flipping the pages slowly, deliberately. Each turn of the paper sounds like a drumbeat. The courtroom leans forward. Everyone senses what's coming. Mr. Hale, Caprio begins, your original citation was for a parking violation, $75. Because you failed to appear, that became $250. Then came this contempt charge, which adds $1,000. And now, he pauses, looking over his glasses, your 42-minute delay this morning earns you another $1,000. The words hang in the air. Richard blinks, incredulous. You're fining me $2,000 for being late? Caprio's tone doesn't waver. No, Mr. Hale. I'm fining you $2,000 for showing contempt, twice. Once by failing to appear, and once by believing your schedule outweighs the court's authority. A faint murmur of approval ripples through the spectators. Richard shifts, forcing a laugh that lands flat. This is absurd. I pay more in taxes in a month than this entire building costs to run. Caprio closes the file and sets his pen down. Then this should be easy for you, pocket change as you might call it. But the lesson isn't in the amount, it's in the humility it demands. The gallery chuckles quietly. The CEO's face reddens. I'm not finished, Caprio continues. Your conduct today, the phone call, the dismissive attitude, the so-called God remark, that's obstruction and aggravation. Another 2,000 in fines. Richard's composure shatters. 4,000? For words. No, Caprio replies. For arrogance. Applause breaks out in the back row before the bailiff restores order. The gavel strikes once, sharp, final. Consider this your invoice for disrespect, the judge says. And payment is due in 30 days. The courtroom has spoken and pride has been priced. The applause fades, replaced by a silence that feels heavier than noise. Judge Caprio removes his glasses, folding them neatly on the bench. When he speaks, his voice carries the weight of experience, not anger. Mr. Hale, he says, you've built an empire. You've created jobs, contributed to the economy, and proven yourself capable of success. But somewhere along the way you confused financial worth with moral worth. Success without humility isn't greatness, it's arrogance dressed in a suit. Richard stands frozen, the swagger gone. You said 700 people depend on you, Caprio continues. Then imagine what they'll learn from your behavior today. When you ignore the law, when you treat others as lesser, you teach them that power justifies disrespect. Is that the legacy you want? The words land like quiet thunder. The judge leans forward slightly. Money without respect is just paper. Authority without empathy is just control. And power without accountability, that's tyranny, Mr. Hale. The CEO stares down at the floor, jaw tight, the reality of his downfall setting in. Caprio's voice softens, almost fatherly now. I don't enjoy humiliating anyone. My purpose here isn't punishment, it's perspective. You walked in thinking you were untouchable. You'll leave reminded that the law touches everyone equally. He pauses, letting that truth settle over the room. You call yourself God in your world, he adds. But in mine, every person kneels before the same law. Even me. The crowd remains silent. No clapping this time, only respect. Richard nods slightly, unable to meet the judge's eyes. For the first time, his silence isn't defiance. It's understanding. In that still moment, the real verdict is delivered, not on paper but in conscience. News travels fast, faster than Richard Hale ever imagined. Within hours, clips of the courtroom exchange spread across social media. The headline reads, Judge Caprio schools arrogant CEO who called himself God. Millions watch, sharing, commenting, debating. Some cheer the judge's poise, others marvel at the CEO's downfall. But everyone agrees, justice was poetic that day. By evening, the board of directors at Hale Systems convenes an emergency meeting. Alan Mercer, a senior board member and one of the company's founding partners, speaks first. We all saw the footage, he says quietly. That was more than bad optics. It was a reflection of leadership gone wrong. Richard sits across from him, pale and silent, the same man who once filled every room with noise. Mercer doesn't gloat. His disappointment cuts deeper than anger. You've built something extraordinary, he says, but arrogance corrodes from the inside out. This company can't afford a God complex at the top. There's no argument left in Richard. The viral shame has already stripped him of defense. The board votes unanimously. Mandatory leadership ethics training for all executives, starting with the CEO himself. Days later, Richard issues a public statement. I let pride distort my perspective, he writes. Judge Caprio reminded me that leadership isn't about control, it's about accountability. I accept full responsibility for my behavior and its consequences. The fine, $4,250, is paid immediately. But the true cost is the mirror he was forced to look into. Months pass. Inside Haleon's offices, a quiet transformation begins. Meetings start on time. Voices lower. Gratitude returns. And Richard Hale, once the loudest man in the room, now listens more than he speaks. For the first time, leadership looks less like power, and more like humility. 6 months later, the storm has passed, but the memory remains. The clip of Judge Caprio's courtroom still circulates online, not as gossip anymore but as a lesson. In boardrooms, classrooms, and leadership seminars, people quote that moment when arrogance met accountability. You've earned wealth, not privilege, has become a mantra across business circles. Inside Hale Systems, the atmosphere is different. Gone are the clipped commands and tense silences that once ruled the halls. Employees speak freely now, meetings feel collaborative instead of combative. And at the center of it all stands Richard Hale, not the titan who once believed himself untouchable, but a man who finally learned the strength in humility. He arrives early for every meeting. He thanks his staff by name. When mistakes happen, he owns them. One afternoon, an intern accidentally mentions the viral video. The room goes quiet, until Richard chuckles softly. "It's fine," he says. "That day saved me from becoming the kind of leader I swore I'd never be." Later in an interview, a reporter asks him what changed. He pauses for a long moment before replying. "I met a judge who reminded me I'm not God," he says. "Best lesson of my life." The reporter smiles. "And the fines?" Richard nods. "Worth every dollar." Outside the courthouse where it all began, the marble steps glint under the morning sun. Judge Caprio continues his daily work, calm, steady, unshaken. Another case, another story, another chance to remind someone that respect weighs more than money. For Richard Hale, the verdict never truly ended that day. It started a new kind of sentence, one written not in legal ink but in gratitude. And this time he serves it willingly. The camera pans back to the empty courtroom. The sunlight filters through tall windows, catching the worn edges of the bench where Judge Caprio once delivered his unforgettable verdict. A voiceover begins, calm, thoughtful, the tone of reflection rather than victory. Richard Hale walked into this courtroom believing he was untouchable, the narrator says. He thought success made him immune, wealth made him invincible, and power made him right. But in front of one man, a judge who's seen every kind of pride and every kind of fall, he learned the truth. Clips flash across the screen, the smirk, the arrogance, the silence, the verdict. No one, the voice continues, is above the law. Not the powerful. Not the wealthy. Not the self-proclaimed gods of industry. In this room, justice doesn't care about your title, only your character. The shot lingers on Judge Caprio's gavel resting quietly on the desk. He reminded us that humility isn't weakness, it's wisdom. That respect isn't granted by success, it's earned through conduct. And that one moment of arrogance can cost far more than money ever could. The scene cuts to black, then fades into white text. Respect is mandatory. Humility is priceless. The narrator returns, voice firm but warm. So the next time you think you're too important for the rules, remember this story, the CEO who called himself God and met a judge who reminded him he was human. Pause. Then the closing line. Subscribe to Real Judge Stories for more true moments where arrogance meets authority. And drop your comment below. Was $4,250 enough, or should the lesson have cost more? The gavel falls once more. Justice, and the story, are complete.